president believes that on principle, it's important to release that report so that people around the world and people here at home understand exactly what transpired. There are obviously going to be some limits about what can be said given the classified nature of the program, but because of the scrupulous work of the committee and the administration and the intelligence community in particular, we've declassified as much of that report as we can.
$40 million of your dollars on a partisan Senate report covering the use of torture by the U.S. government in ferreting out terrorist killers, unnecessary cleansing, or handing the enemy new reasons to attack. He's the retired U.S. Army colonel with more than 30 years field and operational intelligence experience. Now at the London Center for Policy Research, Lieutenant Colonel Tony Shaffer is on MidPoint. Tony, good to see you again.
Thanks for having me. Good to be on.
Is it fair to say that Dianne Feinstein and others, in your opinion, are doing nothing more than blowing partisan smoke and mirrors at the American public and will cost lives?
Yes, and let me be clear, just for your audience to understand, I'm considered persona non grata to she and her staff because I had to testify to them back in 2005 on something called Able Danger. And this is why I know this is partisan. We gave them in that session, Ed, in 2005, clear and compelling evidence about how we had found 9/11 hijackers before 9/11, to include Mohammed Atta. And because that didn't fit with the narrative they wanted to go with, they trashed the project, trashed the report. A report came out from them 2 years later saying that Able Danger didn't do anything. So I know firsthand that whatever she does is completely partisan. In this case, it is clearly both a poke in the eye to those line officers at CIA serving and doing the hard things. And secondly, this is meant to be essentially if you will, a attempt to diminish the United States morally to our enemies. This is completely inappropriate, both from the practical aspect of really creating a chilling effect on those people like myself, like other CIA officers who have to go out and do the hard work, and then giving our enemies clear and compelling advantage to justify their actions. To me, this is not only un-American, this is actually going to cause grave damage to our ability to conduct foreign policy and military intelligence operations overseas for the next 10 years.
Are we looking at, in many ways, what could be treason?
In my judgment, this is a treasonous act. She is not putting out the full picture. It is not a balanced report. And again, Ed, let me be very clear for your audience. You know, I'm not a without opinion spectator. I've been involved with her committee, but that experience has taught me to not trust anything that they do, because they will not give you a fair hearing. And I agree with former Vice President Cheney on this. I know for a fact, since I've had to brief black operations to that level, that these people, to include Senator Feinstein, were given full and compelling information about those activities, no matter how unsightly, no matter how bad they were told up front. So now this reminds me of that scene in Casablanca where Lieutenant Renault is given his gambling winnings when he says, "I'm shocked to find gambling going on here." She's part of the problem, Ed, and this is her way of poking the American people in the eye on the way out of office.
I want to use those two words that you mentioned twice here, clear and compelling. First of all, let's get down to clear and compelling evidence. In your opinion, and the opinion of many others, there is clear and compelling evidence that this report is basically spitting in the eye of. Tony, the American people will then ask, how can you do that? If your evidence is provable and it's true and they know it, then what are they doing here lying to us?
Well, there's two aspects of this. First, some of the things they're portraying as torture, I would do. Let me be very clear for your audience. This is going to really upset some of my friends on the left. I don't believe threatening someone with death, making them think they're going to die, is torture. That's part of interrogation. I have done similar things. With that said, we don't behead people, we don't follow through. So this is where we have the Jedi Knight aspect of this. While we understand the dark arts, Ed, we don't cross the line. And I don't believe report shows that anybody purposely went out of their way with authority to cause bodily harm permanently. Secondly, beyond that, when the things that were done, they were done with authority. Dianne Feinstein and those others who were in the oversight loop approved them. So as much as it may pain them now to think that they were somehow part of this, they were somehow part of this. They were as responsible as the man in the field conducting whatever act they now find reprehensible, they approved. So this is not only insane, this is why they're doing this. This is basically their way of trying to get the stink off of them, because they're as guilty as anyone else if there's guilt to be had.
30 seconds, we'll break, come back and do more. But in those 30 seconds, in your opinion, what will our enemies glean from this release?
Well, there's a lot of techniques which come close to those still being used. I can't get into that. Some of those techniques have to do with psyching someone out. Ed, if you're my enemy, I'm going to do whatever I can to get in your head to make you think I'm going to do harm to you. I will not do harm to you, but I want you to believe you will. Therefore, I think it's important for our interrogators, especially now, to be able to break people without touching them. You have to do that with psychology. I think we're giving far too much away regarding the psychology of interrogation by this report.
Hold that thought. Breaking back with Lieutenant Colonel Tony Shaffer, we will get to the bottom of the torture issue as used to gain real intelligence. And at 51 minutes after the hour, in Telling It Like It Is, why the release of this terror report could indeed border on treason. It's next on MidPoint.
Bob Krebs just back.
Let's welcome back from the London Center for Policy Research to dig deeper into the issue of torture, retired Lieutenant Colonel Tony Shaffer. It's what this report is all about, Lieutenant Colonel. It speaks to what we know as torture. Do Americans need to drop some of the political correctness, if you will, and understand that the world today, the way it is, you spoke to this briefly in the last segment, torture happens. And what we describe as torture and what they're sometimes noting as torture is, and it's politically incorrect as possible.
Right.
It is necessary in order to keep people from dying.
The real torture would be, and let me be very clear, severing of arms and legs and hands, taking and fulfilling a threat to harm a child. That's torture. Threatening those things is not torture. It's called intimidation. There's some very sophisticated techniques that we use to break people who really make them think that it's the end of the world. Ed, that's our job. That's the way we get people to talk to us. There's the old saying, sometimes you have to hide the truth to get the truth. That's our mantra as undercover intelligence officers. That's what we're talking about here. The dark side of the force, if you will. You have to learn how to use the dark side without going over to the dark side. And I think that's where we're completely missing this here. We are not ISIS. We are not Al-Qaeda. We do not kill people for purposes of trying to intimidate others. We actually try to do what we can to get them to talk to us. Now, let me talk about some other things versus interrogation versus waterboarding. I'm one of those who I think you had minimal, if any, good coming out of waterboarding. People who are under that level of duress tend to tell you what you want to hear to make you go away. I and others, to include Ali Soufan, FBI special agent, believe that through good interrogation that you can break people by understanding their greatest fears. Those fears, Ed, are things which you have to manipulate. And then that is very torturous, if you will, to that individual. It is not torture. So I think we have to be much clearer in how we define torture versus interrogation. That's part of the problem here. And yes, we have to get past this politically correct narrative that somehow we can't do what's necessary, which has been traditional in our military since before World War II, to learn how to interrogate and break people without causing bodily harm. It's necessary and something we must clearly define and continue to do.
What about those in the report, Senator Feinstein and others have said it as well, that they have evidence and they have former CIA operatives and they have people who have been in the intelligence community who say without a shadow of a doubt, torture doesn't work. It doesn't provide any actionable intelligence whatsoever, and it is a waste of time.
I believe, and again, I referenced my book, Operation Dark Heart. There's 2 chapters devoted to us breaking U.S. citizen we captured in Afghanistan. Now, I say in the book, so just so everybody's clear, I'm not saying I would not use torture, but the limited range of issues that would prompt me to do that are extraordinarily few. Tactical information, like my friend Colonel Allen West shot a gun off near a guy's head, which considered torture. Something like that I would consider doing is save lives. With that said, once you capture someone, Ed, you're much better off taking the long approach of breaking them, because the tactical information often is wrong. There was a lot of false positives that were received by these guys being tortured. If you recall, back in 2003 and 2004, a bunch of alerts came up to Washington and New York City, which were completely false. To this, basically, that was Al-Qaeda guys lying to try to get the torture to stop. So I've seen firsthand that torture will get you false positive information. It's one of those things where I don't say never do it. I'm saying the way you apply it is on a very small, maybe 1 or 2% of the potential cases. Everything else should be long-term interrogation, understanding the fears of the individual and going about it in a very systematic way.
Can you say then, beyond a shadow of a doubt, at least in your opinion, that what this report is assailing here, that you can answer back and say from experience that you know that actionable intelligence was gained, that Osama bin Laden was killed in part thanks to what we learned, and that Americans today are safer simply because of what you learned, the CIA learned, despite what this report says?
I'm saying, based on my experience, that there may have been some small percentage that was gained through enhanced interrogation.
But that small percentage adds up, does it not? It
Does.
becomes
It does.
pieces like building blocks in order to build a case.
It does. And again, some of us would say waterboarding, since we do it to our own folks, is not necessarily terror. So again, I'm on the camp here that, you need to consider what we believe is really torture. Again, I believe bodily harm, permanent bodily harm, is torture. I don't believe threatening. I don't believe interrogating with the intent of intimidation is torture. So again, I think, Ed, we have to go back and redefine what exactly we define as torture versus what the rest of the world really considers torture.
30 seconds left here. Do you now believe that with the release of this report that everybody from the military on down to the traveling teenage tourist around the world is now in peril and is going to be targeted at an even greater level by the terrorists looking to kill Americans?
We already knew that things which were considered torture happened. That should have been the end of the story. Basically, looking at the oversight mechanisms, Ed, and who said yes and when. That's it. That's all this report should say. The rest of it is pornography. This is pornography which will be used by our adversaries for purposes of justifying their terror acts. It serves no good purpose. It is a voyeuristic move by Senator Feinstein to ingratiate herself to those forces who find problems with us to justify their bad acts against us. It's a bad move. I think we will see bad things come from this.
Lieutenant Colonel Tony Shaffer, it is always a pleasure, my friend. Thanks so much for joining us. We'll talk again soon.
Thanks for having me.
And MidPoint will continue, where we question everything.